Alright guys, so we're almost wrapping up here. The last thing that we're going to do is code our player. So to begin with, we want to make sure that our player always starts in the correct area every time we're playing the game. So that's going to be our starting line. So to begin, we're going to click on our events tab and add when green flag clicked. Then we're going to go into motion and add a go to block. X is going to be 0, Y is going to be -1. And then we're going to go into looks and add a hide. Once we've done this, we want to make sure that our player is able to respawn, which means they have to hide and then show back up. So to do this, we're going to go into our events tab. We're going to add when I receive, change this to respawn. Go into looks, and we're going to add a set ghost to 100. So this hides our player immediately. And then to unhide them, we're going to go into control, repeat 10, and then back into looks, we're going to add a change ghost by -10. So now it's going to do the opposite, and then it's going to show our player back up. The next block of code is going to be specifically for our player to move. So we're going to go back into our events tab. We're going to use when green flag is clicked. We're going to go into looks and add a show block. And then we're going to add a forever to make sure it's forever checking for our keys to move our player. And then we're going to add an if then. So for this first if then is going to be for the idle pose, which is just the costume where our player is just straight looking at us. And that's when they're basically not doing anything. So we're going to go inside of our operators. We're going to add a not. We're going to go into sensing. We're going to add key space press, change the space to any, and then we're going to go into looks, and then add a switch costume to costume 00. So at this point, you can either add more if statements and then add all the extra blocks, or you can just hover over the if, right click, or use your 2 fingers and click on your thumb pad, and then duplicate it, put it right in the bottom. We're going to go ahead and take away the not, and now we're going to start adding the other keys. So this one is going to be when they're jumping, so up arrow, and we're going to change this to our costume 01. We're going to duplicate again. This time it's going to be for our right arrow, and we're going to change it to costume 3. Next will be our left arrow, and we're changing this to costume 2. The last two is going to be when 2 keys are pressed, so when up and left is pressed or up and right is pressed. So I'm going to duplicate this, add it at the bottom. We're going to go into operators, and we're going to add an and. So now it's looking for 2 keys. I'm going to duplicate this, and now I have my 2 keys. This one is going to be my up arrow, and I'm going to leave this one as my left arrow and change this to costume 4. I'll do one last duplicate, changing this to my right arrow, and then changing this to costume 5. So now that we've done creating the code for our player's movement, respawn, and where we want them to show up, the last block of code that we actually want to add is going to be when it's touching certain colors. So you remember in our platform sprite, we have different colors for different things. Our hazards have different colors that we need to code, even the ones that we've even custom made. Our lava has a specific code. Our level pad has a specific code. Our jump pad has a specific code. So this is just to make sure that these colors have code attached to them so that when the player touches it, it does something. So to start off, I would say just be careful because we're going to be moving back and forth between the player and the platform sprite. So it's always good to make sure that you know where you're adding the code. this code is going to the player sprite, and we know this because our player sprite is highlighted blue, and also the little icon here shows what we have, which is our player. So to begin, we're going to add from the events tab, when green flag is clicked, then we're going to go inside of our control. We're going to add a forever. We're going to go into our motions and add a change y by -5. And then we're going to go into our control and add a if then. Once we have that, we're going to go into our sensing and we're going to use touching color. So now that we have this, we need to change it to the color. So sometimes when you're able to play the game, it's actually easier to just move around and click on the color by just using this color and using the eyedropper. Sometimes that's a little bit hard. So the other method that you can use is you can go into the platform, go into the costume. You're going to look for the bounce pad. If you don't have this in your game anymore because you deleted it, then you don't have to worry about this section of code. But for everyone else, you're going to use the paint bucket tool. You're going to use the little arrow and use the eyedropper tool. And then you're just going to click on the bounce pad and you're going to see the color. So we have 1697. So now we're going to go back into our player, click on the color, and then change it. So we have 1697. So this is very important. You guys have to put the exact same number. If it's even one number off, even if it does look like the same color, technically Scratch will see it as a different color, because it technically is, even if it is 1 point off, it changes the color. So just be very precise. If this is too hard, you guys can also just write it down separately in a sheet of paper so you guys can have those numbers somewhere that you can see so you don't have to remember it off the top of your head. So once you have this color for the bounce pad, inside of the if, we're going to click on our variable tab. We're going to set our yvel to -20. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to right click on our if and duplicate this. The next color is going to be for our hazards. So I'm going to go back into my platform, going to costume. Now I have two to three different types of hazards. Each one of those colors has to be clicked. So this is actually a hazard, this little coral reef thing that I created. So I'm just going to go ahead, click on my fill, use my eyedropper, click on it, and then see my color. So I have 64, 63, and 60. So I'm going to change this. 64, 63, and then 60. Okay, I'm going to remove this set block, and since this is specifically for when we lose, I'm going to go into my events tab and I'm going to broadcast respawn. So now when I touch it, I immediately respawn. So I'm going to duplicate this again. I'm going to go back into my platform. The next color I have to look out for my respawn is going to be the lava that I have. I'm just going to click on the eyedropper. I have 100, 100, and 0. So I'm going to go back into my code. Okay. And then I'm going to duplicate this again. So for those of you who created, so for example, in my platform, the last thing that I have as a obstacle are my spikes. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So if you guys have a spike, or if you guys have another obstacle, but you added two different colors, then both colors have to have code. Because what happens is, if our player touches one side of that color and that color doesn't have any code, then the player lives, and then it's going to be confusing. So it's always good to add both of the colors just to make sure that you guys have that exactly. Okay, so the first color I'm going to go with is going to be the light gray. So I have 0067. Okay, 67. I'm going to duplicate this one more time. And then my last color is 53. Okay, now that I have that, the next color that I want to have code for is going to be for my next level pad. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my platform, go into costume, and this is the same color I use for all my other levels except for the last two. If you guys change the color of it, that's perfectly fine. Just know that that's the color you have to pick for the next level platform that the player has to touch in order to move on to the next level. If you decided to use different colors for each one of these, then that means you need to have a code for each one of those separate colors. So that's why it's good to kind of use one, because then it makes it a little bit easier and then you don't have to add all those other codes. But if you did it, you do have that as an option. So I'm going to go ahead and look for this color. Okay, so 31, 100, 100. Okay, and then the last thing that we're going to do inside here is we're going to change this to next level. And we're also going to change our variable. So we're going to add a change variable, LVL by 1, so it adds a new level. The last one is that last color that I spoke to you guys about with the last two levels. So for this last one, these last two platforms have a different winning pad, and it's just so that it's able to sense when you're reaching the end and ready to win. So I'm just going to look for this color. So we have 31, 162. Okay. This broadcast we're going to change to win. And then to make sure we're not able to play the game, we're just going to remove that variable. And then we're going to add, from our control, a stop all. And we're changing this to other scripts in this sprite just to make sure that everything else kind of gets erased. The last thing that we're going to add is going to be at the very bottom of this if, and it's going to be another change block. So a change y by, and we're changing this by 5. Okay. So these are all the codes that we ended up creating for our player. Make sure that's connected. So once we have this already coded, you guys are free to now play your game, test it out, make sure that everything is working. If something isn't working, that means something in the code is wrong, so you need to kind of double check on that. But once you're able to test, it's always good to make sure that you're able to play the game, that the game isn't too hard, that you're able to go to different levels, and that your player doesn't get stuck anywhere. So now that you guys are all set, go ahead and start checking your game and balancing it out just to make sure that everything kind of works and fits the way that you want it to.